I want to answer a question. I got one from last week. After we did our nutrition thing that I want to touch on quick because it was too complex to answer well in a written form. So, last week we did the whole nutrition thing. Just talk about like some concepts, philosophies, whatever. And one of the questions I got was, my kid's super busy doing all kinds of shit, like ice workout, back to backs, 2 a days, whatever. What should they be focused on? What should they be from a nutrition standpoint? And my thing again always with kids is like they can get away with so much, so it's not the most important thing ever. But as a guideline, I always talk about like moderate protein, moderate carbs. Like those are your two: protein repairs, carbs refuel. So focusing on those things around performance, particularly even outside performance, is good. But kind of a rule of thumb too is like I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and I like the way this nutritionist that was talking was explaining it for youth. She's saying like protein builds, carbs fuel, and fats protect. So those are kind of three ways you can think about the macronutrients. But generally speaking, around performance is protein carb focus. So between games, between workouts, between whatever, that's your goal. Focus on those two things. Make sure that they're getting something that has those two things. And then from a hydration standpoint, it's mostly just water. So unless you have a kid that's super, super sweaty or they're sweating a ton, then you might want to look at an electrolyte kind of beverage. But the most important thing, because he was specifically asking me about some of these, like whatever, BioSteel and some of the other sport drink things. And I was just saying to him, like, the most important from the hydration, like electrolyte standpoint, is salt. Like when you sweat, the thing you sweat out most is salt. So that's sodium. The second is potassium, and the rest of the electrolytes not so much in your sweat. So you want something that replaces salt more than anything else. And this is why if you look at like Prime or Body Armor or whatever, they have warning labels for kids under 14 because the main electrolyte they replace is actually potassium, and it's not a good source of sodium. So I think like I remember reading like a Prime label the other day. It was like 700 milligrams of potassium um, per bottle, and so which is a ton. So that's why they have a warning label about that for kids, and that's not the primary electrolyte you want to replace anyways. It's sodium. So um, look for things that are more skewed towards sodium if you're going to do an electrolyte thing because they're super sweaty. But if they're not super sweaty, you don't necessarily need that. Like just water's fine. But if you're going to add an electrolyte, just make sure it's more of a sodium thing. And they need carbs for fuel, and they need protein. So the last thing I want to say about that before we go on is, especially for parents, I don't know if I mentioned it last week or not, but your goals as a parent, if you're focused on whatever your nutrition strategy is, weight loss, whatever, is not the same as the goals for an athlete. So if you start to bleed your focus into what your kids are doing, so the sugar is bad, the low carb, the whatever diet thing you're focused on as an adult that's trying to do more weight management, that's not the same focus as a kid that is supposed to be a more high performing athlete, right? And kid goes from whatever, let's say 8 when they're old enough to pay attention to what you're saying to 23 or older if you're then into the pros, like playing as a professional athlete. It's just fundamentally not the same focus from a nutrition standpoint. So be careful that you're not um, trying to enforce your weight management strategy of nutrition on their performance nutrition strategy. So that's a thing to be cautious of, because for some people listening to me, it might be that's what they think when I'm talking about they need the sugar, they need the carbs, and they're just like, well, that's not good. Like that's not what they should be having all the time or whatever. And it's not about it being all the time, but it's just they need something that you don't necessarily need so much in your role as parent. So just be cautious of that, where you don't get your nutrition philosophy and your goals from a nutrition standpoint and project them onto your kid who has a different set of outcomes that they're looking for from
Yeah,
a performance
yeah. You
standpoint.
put you put a kid on a low carb diet that's a very active kid, then you're gonna wonder why he's half asleep all the time. So that's the difference, right? You're burning calories, and you got to look at the volume, the volume of food and stuff that you're eating. Like your kids should out eat you by about 3 times, right? Because they have to fuel. Like it's almost like you can't eat too much when you're very active. I mean, I'm throwing that out there kind of stupidly, but um, yeah. So you can't like you can't let them overeat like idiots, but they're going to eat more. They should because they're probably burning. You know, I don't know what a typical adult would burn in a day, but I know what I do with workouts, with a little bit of skating, and being, let's say, on a fairly active day, like just moving around a lot. Like I burn a decent amount, but it's not close to what my kids burn, right? So I gotta. That's the difference, right? So I don't need as many carbohydrates as he does. Um, Mine's more protein,
Yeah,
you
and
know.
there's a difference. That's important to just keep in mind from that perspective too. I think I heard the other day too, the for carbs anywhere from 3 to 8 grams per kilogram um, of body weight for athletes. So you can be up to like almost 700 grams of carbohydrates for a more adult. So someone around my size, easily close to 700 carbohydrates a day and 700 grams of carbs a day, which is a ton, man. It's crazy. So for anyone that's in the average person with if you have an office job or you're relatively sedentary or whatever, that's you don't need that much, right? But it's a just different goal set. It's a different mindset. So that's the thing. Just to answer that question quick, is just that hydration piece. Just be cautious of the electrolyte stuff. Make sure that it's primarily sodium, and there isn't even a recommended amount because the amount you sweat out is different. Like some kids are really salty sweaters, some people aren't. Like so, there's not even a necessarily an amount of sodium they need to replace that I can give, but that's the primary electrolyte you're trying to replace. So if you're drinking things that aren't replacing that, then there's no point of drinking that thing.
Then you're
You know,
over.
yeah, and overdoing
You're
it.
the water's actually not doing it for you.
Right.
Yeah.
So and then you get things like I said, like the primes or whatever, and it's too concentrated in something that you don't necessarily need to replace that much of. So you're getting a concentrated blast of potassium. It's like that's not actually what you need to be doing. And then your body has to work on diluting that. Right. So, anyways, point being, the hydration piece, good. Um, Water is the most important. And then if they need some salts, look for like a more salt based, sodium based electrolyte mix. That's why I like BioSteel. That's why I used it before we even started working with them because guys actually use it
Yeah.
because it's a more balanced
Yeah.
electrolyte
It's
profile.
really good.
Yeah, and
And it
then
tastes great.
yeah, it does. And then the nutrition standpoint, it's protein carb moderate. So